So have you ever had a parent or guardian set you up on a date with someone? It's really uncomfortable and really embarrassing, particularly when your parent doesn't even know you and doesn't know what your needs are or what your likes and dislikes are or what you're looking for in a partner or even just a date. Hi there, I'm Ann. Welcome to my channel, Whole Wellness with Ann. I really appreciate you tuning in. We're in the middle of a series on boys, or as we used to call them in junior high and high school, guys. And the struggle, the tremendous struggle I had, aside from just your basic functioning young woman and developing young woman, because of the toxic family I was raised in and being one of 6 children and the scapegoated child in my toxic family system with a very controlling father, possibly narcissistic, and a very emotionally and mentally and spiritually unstable mom, possibly borderline. And having 2 older brothers who basically traumatized me growing up. The struggles I had with boys were so profound and so difficult for me to navigate that I wound up going through a lot of relationships with boys that were a complete waste of time and very hurtful. But I wasted a lot of myself and a lot of time, a lot of energy, and a lot of my heart, mind, soul just expended on people in general that were not worthy of me. And that is one of the side effects of being raised in an unhealthy home or by unhealthy people. That's why it's so important to pull the brake on the generational trauma that is happening in our families. And the primary reason that I had so many struggles throughout adolescence with boys is because I was raised daddyless. Now, we covered what it means to be daddyless already, but just a quick recap for those who are just tuning in to this series on boys. Daddyless means you grew up without a emotionally connected, present, intimate relationship type father. In other words, you may have lost your father and he may have not been physically present either because of death or divorce, or you may never have known your father. He may never have been in the picture. You may have had a father who was in and out of your life with drug addiction or incarceration or alcohol problems or something of that sort. And you may have had a father that was physically present, but not emotionally or mentally present or connected with you because of the drugs, alcohol, perhaps workaholic, or just his personality or fathering style. Now, a lot of fathers, unfortunately, fall into one of those categories, too many. And I happened to grow up in a home with a physically present father who was not only extremely emotionally disconnected, he was also very ignorant when it came to relationships in general and intimacy in general. But I do love my family. I've processed quite a bit of the trauma that I've been through and the hurts and the angst that I was raised with. And my goal is to always be improving and growing. So I'm at a place in my life, fortunately right now, where there aren't a lot of hard feelings towards my family members. There's a great deal of pity, and I've already forgiven my parents. I do understand the fact that they were the result of their own independent traumas and childhoods that were very unhealthy for them. And so that resulted in them being adults and parents that were also unhealthy. And again, passed on to yet another generation of me and my siblings who are unhealthy. And I turned 50 in 2023, and it's just been a couple of years since I've gotten into therapy. So all of this I still consider very new. And I did a series a couple months ago on abuse. And in that series, I promised I would do a follow-up series, a mini series on boys, because in the abuse series, I covered everything about my childhood and growing up in my family and what I witnessed and what abuse I suffered and the struggles I had and the memories I have of experiences and what it was like to be in my home growing up. And at the end of that series, I promised a series on boys because of the fact that it was such a profound effect on me and how I functioned and how I grew into the woman that I used to be as of a couple years ago, and the chaos and anxiety and stress and drive for perfection and extroversion when I'm naturally an introvert, and this desperation for friendships and relationships and allowing people to get too close to me who are people who are not healthy and are not good for me, and giving of myself too much, and a tendency towards codependency and all this other stuff going on in my mind and in my heart and just ripping me apart at the seams internally up until I got into therapy. And the story about the boys was completely absent from the abuse series because there is so much to tell and so much to talk about pertaining to how I was affected and what these relationships with boys were like and what was going through my head during adolescence when I began to notice boys and start to interact with them on a mature level. And I can't even begin to tell you the struggles I had. I would recommend to go back and start at the beginning with the intro video and watch the first 4 videos to kind of get the background of that transition period from childhood into junior high. Now I'm in high school, and this is video number 5, and we're going to pick up here because I'm just getting out of sophomore year of high school. I've told you about Ben, I've told you about Andy, I told you about Jeremy, I've told you about Chad. Now I'm going to talk about Scott. In my junior year in high school, my mom set me up. And this is one of those things that's profoundly embarrassing, I think, for anybody who's had a parent get involved in their dating life. So by the end of my sophomore year, and I was getting ready to go into my junior year, I had started coming out of my shell, not in a positive way. I was born an introvert, and I was born a super empath and a deeply feeling creative person. I was an artist from very, very young. And through the course of young adolescence, preteen into teen years, I had banged my head against the wall with my parents, trying to just be myself. And my parents never really gave me that encouragement and self-confidence and belief in myself. I became a 14, 15-year-old freshman, sophomore in high school that felt and believed that everything about myself was wrong, that I was doing life incorrectly because everybody else seemed to have friends or boyfriends or families that they hung out with and were friends with and, got along with. And there was one girl I remember in my class that I just used to when I was young. And I have pretty much disliked her all of my adulthood, even though I've not had any contact with her. The memory of the relationships that she had with her parents and her siblings used to make me so jealous. It's embarrassing. Jealous. This girl was cute, friendly, funny, fashionable, popular, athletic, smart, creative. She was an artist too. She's someone I grew up with from first grade through high school. We graduated together. And sorry, it's winter. My hair is staticky. I went for a walk and it's kind of windblown. This is someone who I don't recall ever treating me super poorly. I don't have any distinct memories of her bullying me like I have of Wendy. This is someone who I just disliked, and ever since I went through counseling and healing, I have looked back upon my life and completely dissected my past, at least most of it as far as I know. And this is someone who stood out in my memory banks from my past as someone who I never knew why I disliked her. I never knew why I just literally loathed this girl. And ever since I went through healing, I've kind of been rethinking a lot of these people from my past. And she's one that stood out to me as being unjustifiably disliked. And once I began the process of healing, lo and behold, I discovered what it was for me was a deep, horrible jealousy, absolute green jealousy. And it was because, like I said, this girl was pretty, friendly, popular, fashionable. She knew who she was. She was smart. And she got along really well with her mom, with her dad, all her siblings. They were all super close. And they were all happy. Their family was happy. And because we went to Catholic school together and high school, her family went to the same church as my family. And so I saw them every Sunday. I saw her every day in school and saw her every Sunday in church, and her family. And I used to watch them interact. And it ate me up inside. But she was just one of many kids my age who seemed to have it together, at least for the most part. I would observe so many people and think, what do they have that I don't? You know, and I always thought it was because I wasn't pretty enough, or I wasn't smart enough, or I wasn't creative enough, or I wasn't athletic enough, and that the problem was me. That I was doing something wrong, saying something wrong. I wasn't looking the right way. I wasn't dressing the right way, and so on and so forth. I always thought it was me, because at home, I was being told I was wrong because I quit the basketball team and I didn't have straight A's, and I wasn't the popular kid like my dad wanted me to be. And so my dad had this scholarly, athletic type vision for his kids, in particular me, and I believe my two older brothers, and forgot about the other three, I think. But then when we didn't meet those needs or requirements of his, then we were peons. We were useless. It reminds me of that show, that movie, Muriel's Wedding, that Toni Collette starred in years ago, I think in the 90s. You know, I'm Muriel. I felt like I was just another mouth to feed. My dad, growing up, he had no clue about me. He had no clue. He had no clue about any of his kids. When my brothers, in fact, got into football and wrestling, that is where they excelled, because my family's a bunch of beefcakes, and it was exceptional for them to be in the weight room lifting weights and pumping iron and getting muscle and competing. And when they were successful, either on the football field or on the wrestling mat, my dad was like, yeah, you know, my sons are great. Meanwhile, here I was, this deeply feeling super empath that was born an introvert, and being raised to believe that I was supposed to be a scholar and supposed to be an athlete, and that's the only way I could win. And I needed to find a real career, and art wasn't good enough, and I couldn't do anything with that, and I needed to be outgoing and extroverted, and that's the only way I was going to be able to succeed, and I need to charm the pants off people and sell myself and, you know, impress people and achieve things, and that's the only way I was going to get by or succeed in life, this thing called life. And so I got to sophomore year, junior year, and I had not accomplished or won in any way, shape, or form. I had little victories the more I put myself out there, like in sophomore year when I joined the cheerleading squad. That brought me kudos from my parents, and in particular my dad, because I was part of something then. And so once I started to get a little bit of momentum, a few pats on the back and a few high fives from my dad, of course, I tried a little bit more and a little bit more to put myself out there. It wasn't comfortable for me. It wasn't my natural instinct. But of course, I wanted a relationship with my dad. Of course, I wanted to impress him. Of course, I wanted him to think highly of me. Big mistake. Meanwhile, because as I've mentioned in a prior video, I couldn't win with both my parents. I either had to impress my mom, pacify her, and take care of her needs because my dad didn't, or I had to impress the heck out of my dad and meet his needs and do what was expected of him. And if I pacified one, it was at the expense of the relationship with the other one. And if I pacified the other one or met the other one's needs, then it would be at the expense of the other one. So there was this constant push, pull between me and my mom and me and my dad, and I couldn't win. Honestly, I haven't looked into it too much, but it kind of is representative, and I've thought numerous times before that my dad was narcissistic, and it is possible that I was the third point in this triangulation system that a narcissist creates. I'm probably going to have to do more studying on that and the dynamic that it was like in my home growing up, because it was this constant battle. I was my mom's therapist. I was supposed to be her BFF. She parentified me. It was just a disaster. But I won more with my dad because I had 3 younger siblings that my mom was distracted with at home. So she basically forgot about me. You know, she detached from me. She would criticize me and kind of give me a hard time and harass me and stuff like that. And she and I verbally sparred quite a bit the older I got in high school. But even though she and I started to come apart a little bit, it was not as bad as being apart from my dad and feeling like a complete loser. So I tended to gravitate towards pleasing my dad because it was easier for me. When I started to gravitate more towards my mom, my dad was more antagonistic. So it was much easier for me to kind of lean towards being what my dad wanted and expected me to be. And also naturally, as a young woman developing, I wanted my dad. I wanted his attention. I wanted his approval. I wanted his affection. There was no male in my home telling me I was okay, telling me that I was beautiful, telling me that I could succeed and do anything I wanted. I just needed to work hard and dream big and pursue my dreams and, help me kind of navigate small steps and little goals. So the summer before my junior year in high school, between sophomore and junior year, I just happened to get a job as a clerk, a gift shop clerk in this very historic, quaint, lovely, very popular gift shop in the town I grew up in. And it just happened to be a shop that was super, super popular with the tourists. And so I was out front with people, talking to them and selling things. And as I was starting to gravitate towards being like my dad or being what my dad wanted, I was also becoming more extroverted and coming more out of my shell. And I found even more positive reinforcement from the public because they liked my personality. The more I talked to them and the friendlier I was and the more I told them about the products and the more I sold, the more they talked to me and they were nice. I was very honored that people were being nice to me when I was 14 and 15 years old, because in retail, even though it was a job, I falsely felt like these people were all my friends and it was great. I had all this approval and people talked to me and they liked me and they wanted to be around me and they didn't run away. And so my job as a teenager also helped foster this very unhealthy part of me that was called coming out of my shell and becoming extroverted, because what was happening is there was this shell calcifying outside of me and it was building up until I became this shiny, beautiful pearl on the outside, right? And yet here was Anne on the inside, sad, frustrated, stressed, discouraged, disappointed, scared. And I didn't know that that's how I existed for 25, 30 years. And I started to break down the shell and the calcification on the outside of me when I got out of college and went to Yellowstone, which I did talk about in the towards the end of the abuse series. But for the time being, I'm going to stick inside how the development of that shell came about and launch into my junior year and the story about Scott. So as I started to tell you, my mom fixed me up with Scott. So there was going through this time in my junior year, sophomore year into junior year, I was starting to come out of my shell. I had the job in the summertime where I was talking with the public and coming even more out of my shell and getting a lot of positive reinforcement. Meanwhile, the more I enjoyed talking to people because they enjoyed talking to me at my job. The more pats on the back I got with my dad, you're going to be a success. You're going to, good job, good job. And I was like, oh, yay, Dad approves of me. Dad likes hearing about my job and what a success I am at work at 14, 15 years old. So I entered junior year with a very confident mindset about who I was supposed to be and that I could succeed being that person that my dad wanted me to be. So I started joining some activities. I joined the track team, which was a complete farce. We didn't have a really good track coach, someone who was skilled at track and athletic events associated with track, like the high jump and the hurdles and long distance running and sprinting. And we had one really knowledgeable, or two really knowledgeable coaches in my high school for track, but one was a long distance person and one was a boys track coach. So the girls field track coach, which was my events, I did shot put and discus for track, of course, because I was a big girl, right? I couldn't run. What was the point? Well, I didn't like running anyway, so I don't even honestly know how or why I joined track. I think I was just looking for the next thing to do that my dad would approve of. And track, we never exercised in track. I really don't remember ever exercising in track. We literally went out with this pseudo coach outside in the springtime and threw things around, threw the discus, threw the shot put outside and tried not to hit people. And it was high school track. What can I say? And I did okay, I think. And I made friends, at least. I was happy about making friends on the track team. But it got me out of the house. I was doing stuff. But meanwhile, I was also in art class again for the third year. And my junior year in high school, Chad was a senior. Now, Chad is someone I mentioned in the past couple of videos. Chad is my now husband. And he is the boy that I met first day of freshman year in my very first art class on day one and fell head over heels in love with him. And I had a crush on him throughout high school. But when I was a junior, he was a senior and he was only at school for the first couple classes of the day because then he had a work co-op and he left for the afternoon. So I didn't get to see him very much. By junior year, I did learn that he lived in town with his family and he worked at the public library. So there were times my junior year, this is when I started to go to the library after school periodically, literally just to stare at and flirt with Chad. Because, who doesn't go to the library when they're in high school? I only was there to see Chad. Nothing happened with us. That relationship wasn't progressing and nothing was coming of that relationship. He and I were just like fellow high school students. It was going nowhere. Well, the spring of my junior year rolled around and everybody was talking about prom. And I wanted to go to prom. Prom was an event that the junior class put on for the school, for the upperclassmen. And you could only go to prom if you were a junior or a senior or were invited to go to prom by a junior or senior if you were an underclassman. And I thought that because I was a junior, it would be ridiculous if I didn't go. And so many girls in my class were talking about going stag, going solo, or going with a group of friends. And I thought that was the cheesiest thing ever, and that was a cop-out. And they might be confident enough to do so, but if I did that, I would look like a fool. That's just me. That's how I thought I would look if I went stag to prom. So of course I had to have a date for prom. And I remember talking to my mom one evening about this, and I don't even know honestly why I was still talking to my mom. I just didn't know any better. She hadn't given me the best advice about boys up to that point. But I remember talking to her about just being bummed about not being able to go to prom. And she did not encourage, go stay, go with your girlfriends, get dressed up, get your nails done, your hair's done. Just get dressed up and go by yourselves and make it an awesome night. No, she was like, oh yeah, you need to go with a boy. Because that's how my mom was. I was parentified. I was an extension of her. Every thought and feeling and opinion that I had was hers, according to her. And I wasn't an independent, individual person of my own with my own thoughts and feelings. So when she saw me sitting there disappointed and upset and bummed about not being able to go to prom, she stepped up to the plate. She said, well, if you were to go with a boy, who could you go with? Who could you go with? And we started brainstorming about who I could go with, me not having the slightest clue what we were doing or why we were doing it. And then she proposed her friend's son, who was a college freshman out of town, Scott. And I knew this boy. I knew my mom's girlfriend and her kids. And I didn't think anything of Scott. I didn't think he was good looking. We weren't friends. We had never talked before. And my opinion was, I don't know, but my mom was like, let me call my friend and get his number at college. And then you can talk to him and see, if he wants to go. And I thought, sure, why not? I mean, this guy is a freshman in college, and my mom's encouraging me to call him and ask him to prom, my high school prom, my junior prom. And now looking back on that, I think it is the silliest thing ever. My mom just wanted to make me happy, I'm sure, but it wasn't appropriate, really. Scott and I didn't know each other. Where was my mom getting off just saying, why don't you go to prom with Scott? Just because it was the son of her friend. I thought it was very nice of my mom, and I thought of her as a hero at that time because of what she did, because now I finally had a body to go with, a male to go with. And then the more I thought about it, the more excited I got, because it was a male that was a college student that was from out of town, and oh my gosh, was everybody gonna be staring at me with this strange guy and wondering who I was with. And I thought I was the shit, right? And so my mom gave me his number. I called him up, asked him to prom, and don't even ask me how that went. I remember it like it was yesterday, and I can't even believe that I did it. I mean, this was the state I was in as a junior in high school, just desperate. I had gone from internalizing my desperation and wondering why I was such a loser to actually acting it out. I have to have pity on myself and be gentle with myself, though, because it wasn't my fault. This was what happened as a result of my dad being completely disconnected from me. He had no clue what was going on. And honestly, I can't believe that he even allowed this to happen and didn't know what was going on. I can't believe that this all came about without his input. A dad has got to be involved in that kind of thing. Like, your daughter is 15, 16 years old getting ready to go to junior prom, and you're not directly involved. Like, you don't know what's going on. So I pick up the phone, I call Scott. He's totally like, who is this? Who's calling me, asking me to prom? This is so random. Like I said, we had not talked before. And I told him, my mom thought it would be a great idea, so she called your mom gave us the number, I called you, blah, blah, blah. And he was like, let me think about it. Which I thought was a reasonable answer, I guess. And then he says, well, I'm coming back into town from college break in a couple of weeks. How about you and I go out? And I'm thinking, why? He's like, let's just go out for dinner, go to a movie, and just see if, let's talk about how this would work, what we would do for prom and stuff like that. I mean, keep in mind, I'm asking this guy to fill a tank of gas, buy my dinner, buy a corsage, rent a tux, and all this stuff, drop all this money, and he's a freshman in college. So he comes home a couple weeks later from college, and we go out to dinner, and the entire time I'm like this. he's talking about his major, which was some engineering thing. I don't remember. And I could have cared less at that time, and even to this day. It was like my eyes must have glazed over. I must have been like this. But me, as a 16-year-old girl, not having a clue, this was like one of my earliest dates that I can recall. And maybe my first ever date. I don't remember, because we went out to dinner and we went to a movie. So it was like a formal date. And I thought the courteous, nice thing to do was to pay very close attention to what he was saying and act interested and be friendly and responsive to him. And the entire time, what was going through my head is, when are we going to talk about prom? What the heck is wrong with this guy? I am bored out of my mind. I don't know what you're talking about. Why are we talking about this? This is ridiculous. And towards the end of dinner, he's like, wow, I think we'd have a really good time at prom because you listen really well and you're an interesting person to talk to. And I'm like, now looking back, I'm like, Anne, you idiot. I mean, granted, I do have to be gentle on myself because this is going back to when I was 16 years old. And I didn't know. My dad didn't tell me. My mom certainly didn't tell me. She didn't help out. She encouraged me to be a ditzy doofus flirt. And so we went to the movie. Thank God there was no talking in the movie. But then he dropped me back off at home and he said, yeah, let's go to prom. It should be fun. I think we'd have a really good time. Of course he'd think that. I was bored out of my mind, but I just wanted to go to prom. I just needed a male to take me to prom. Apparently, at that age, that's what I thought I needed. And he agreed to it. Unbelievable. Now, fast forward. The planning and everything and the excitement around prom was so amazing. And I was a part of it. And I was one of only a handful of girls that went with boys to prom our junior year. I mean, a handful of girls. There was a bunch that went stag or with groups of friends. But there was maybe, of my somewhat circle of friends, I think I was only one of the 20 of us, I was one of maybe 3 or 4 that actually went with boys. Like on a date to prom and out to dinner and everything. And I felt pretty darn special about that. I really did. And we had a magnificent time. Me and my best friend growing up, Amy, she went with a friend of ours. In fact, she went with our friend from grade school, Jeremy, who I held hands with by the cheese castles on the playground. Great guy, very, very nice person. By high school, I mean, he was definitely the last person I was looking at. He was just a nice boy from grade school or junior high, I guess, 6th grade or whatever it was. But it was fun because we all got along really well. And the 4 of us double dated, Amy and Jeremy and me and Scott. And Scott had borrowed his parents' van for all of us to go together. So we drove together and it was a blast. We really did have a fun time. But I will say, when we were at the dance, one thing that stands out in my memory from that time was how other boys in my class were looking at me for the first time. When I was dancing with Scott, they were looking at me. When I walked in the room, I felt all eyes on me because I was dressed up. I had my nails done, my hair done. I had a gorgeous dress, even for the 80s. You know, I had a aqua with lace, and it was just absolutely beautiful. I still love that dress to this day. It's very out of fashion. You couldn't be caught dead in it today, but I thought the dress was beautiful. It wasn't a cheesy style. It was just a very beautiful dress. And I was on the arm of a boy that they didn't know. But one of the things that should have stood out to me and did not during prom, as far as something that just grossed me out as if there was ever going to be a relationship or any sort of development between me and Scott, this should have stood out in my memory as being something that was very clear to me as something that turned me off. And it was that he was extremely sweaty. And so when we were slow dancing, we were kind of cheek to cheek, and I was extremely disgusted with his sweat against my face. And so when we were dancing, I kind of was like, ugh, you know, and thought at the time, oh, Ann, you're just being a wuss. Oh, Ann, you're just being sensitive. Oh, Ann, these are the things that I was telling myself that probably, you know, I should have listened to, but didn't know I should. I just thought it's just, you know, normal. We were dancing, so of course he's sweating. But I was grossed out. I didn't want to be that close to him. It was grossing me out. You know, it's not like when you're in an intimate relationship with someone that you're really attracted to and you really love, you don't care about their sweat. You really don't. It is, if anything, attractive to you. You know, you still want to be close to him. But at 16, at that prom dance, Scott was just a male to take me to the dance, to the prom, because I wanted to be part of something. And I wanted to be special. And I wanted attention. I wanted affection. I wanted to be treated like a princess. And I was. And then at the end of the night, when we dropped Jeremy and Amy off, and then Scott took me home, he gave me a kiss, and that grossed me out. Just a kiss on the lips. And I walked inside. I remember walking inside our house, and I remember thinking, that felt like I just kissed my brother. Like, ew. And I thought, but it was such a magical evening, and we had so much fun, and we had so many laughs. So I kind of pushed the kiss aside and just focused on the fun, the fluttering eyes and the looks that I got and how magical it was and how fantasy-like it was. And I was living in a fantasy, and I loved the fantasy. Never mind that when he actually kissed my lips, I was totally disgusted and wanted to run for the hills, basically. I was all about the romance of it. Not having a clue. That is where I want to wrap this video up in a closing thought on Scott. And that is that throughout the course of my junior high, freshman, sophomore, and into junior year in high school, do you want to know what I was focused on with these boys? Do you want to know what I spent so much time staring out the window with the binoculars at Ben and dreaming about Chad and fantasizing about how prom was going to be and going out with Scott to the prom and being observed by others? I wanted to be special. I wanted to feel special. I wanted to be loved. I wanted to be accepted. I wanted to be told I was beautiful. I wanted to feel beautiful. And the only way that all of that was going to happen is if I had a boy paying attention to me. And that's what happens to a young woman when she grows up daddyless. Thanks so much for tuning in, guys. I appreciate your time, and I hope this lesson series about boys and girls growing up daddyless is relevant and helpful to you, whatever your situation is and whatever you're going through. Happy New Year once again. Stay tuned for video number 6. We're going to get into Christian in the next video, which is a long story, and it's convoluted and nasty, but there's actually still a little bit more to tell you about Scott. And then my senior year, it's not just Christian, it's Keith and Dan, and in future videos we're going to get into college and Harold. Oh, he was a 2.5-year relationship with me. Waste of time, as I've mentioned numerous times before. So stay tuned. At the very least, if this information is not helpful, hopefully at least it's entertaining for you. Thanks, guys. See ya.